know.
We're now recording.
According to the clock on the wall, it is 1 minute after 7, and I am opening tonight's hearing, meeting. And we will start with a roll call.
Commissioner Orsi.
Here.
Commissioner Scobie.
Here.
Vice Chair Drukowski.
Here.
Chair Slothauer.
Here.
Commissioner Norman.
Here.
Commissioner Frey.
Here.
Commissioner Starbuck.
Here. Looks like we're all here.
All accounted for. Everyone came back after the last couple of public hearings.
Yeah. Which were not nearly as onerous as they might have been. But anyway, so the regular meeting minutes, have all the commissioners read them?
Yes.
And were there any objections or additions?
Mm.
If not, then minutes stand approved as written. All right, the next part of the meeting is one that we all love. It is comments from the public on any subject that is not on the agenda. So, you're limited to 4 minutes. So 3 was kind of tight. I always thought it was, but anyway, so we're going to go to try 4 minutes and see how that works.
Oh, I think the microphone isn't on. Yeah, there we go.
Name's Neil Barlow. I live in Bandon. I just wondered if there was any update on the downtown Marriott project, because I believe their application was at the end of May and they have 180 days, which puts them really, really close to the end.
I'm happy to answer that if you'd like.
Director of Planning, would you care to answer that?
So formal. Yeah, so they handed in an application. I'm not sure exactly what day. And they have 180 days from the day that we deemed them incomplete to get us a complete application or make some other move. I believe that their sort of drop dead date is like December 13th or something like that. So they do have a little while longer to let us know.
But you haven't heard anything yet?
We have not received any new information.
Thank you. Anybody else? Really? You want some more time?
Take 1 minute.
Okay, we're going to go on to a discussion, and the first part of our discussion is code cleanup for 2024. And we have a number of, just a minute, let me get my.
And maybe while you're doing that, I'm going to ask Nikki, can you pull up the presentation? Thank you.
Okay, we are going to start this with a staff presentation.
Thank you. So as a reminder, this is just a work session. This is the first time we're talking about the code cleanup for the next year. Every year, the Planning Commission meets with the City Council to discuss the work program for the following year. We've requested that we do this sort of like annual code cleanup is what we're calling it. And it's an opportunity for us to fix any things that we discover throughout the year don't work really well, clarify items, and make sort of small changes that otherwise wouldn't be appropriate for their own public hearing or change. So I wanted to, again, start this conversation, but we will have more than one work session on this topic to just give you some thoughts about what staff has seen that we might look at. Okay. Can't get it to work. Okay, give me 1 second. Getting in my steps. Okay, and this thing isn't working either. There we go. Nikki, will you click to the next slide? Okay, perfect. So the first thing on here is to review a number of changes that have come out of the legislature. There is an option for you to either do this housing cleanup as part of this code cleanup, or we also anticipate having a larger housing public hearing. So if it feels like too much for this, or if you want to just group all housing things together to keep this one a little bit smaller, we can do that. But I wanted to provide you the legislative report from House Bill 3395, which was the housing omnibus bill. There are a number of things in here that aren't related to us. So Bear had asked some questions like, how does this apply? It doesn't all apply to us. But the things that do are requiring that we allow duplexes in any zone that allows single-family detached dwellings, so as an outright permitted use. I think almost all of our zones already allow that, but I wanted to just let you know that that's now a statewide requirement. The next one would be there's some language in there about requiring housing in a commercial zone. And again, I think it's a decision of the planning commission as to whether or not you want to sort of meet the minimum requirements through this code cleanup or do any sort of additional work as part of a housing amendment. One of the things that we recognized as staff is when the clear and objective housing clear and objective criteria requirement came out for all needed housing. Anywhere where housing as a conditional use needs to change. So we can no longer allow any sort of housing to go through the conditional use process because it's just inherently not clear and objective, right? If the planning commission's making discretionary decisions on it, it is not clear and objective. So we have to move those into outright permitted. There are certain regulations that we can create around it. For example, with commercial on this one, if you've read through it, the commercial was this allowance to that everyone would be required to allow housing in a commercial zone if the bottom floor of the commercial unit was an actual commercial use, then the second floor could be residential. Right now, our code allows all sorts of residential housing types in commercial zones. So I think it's important for the planning commission to make a recommendation about what you'd like to see. Do you want to see our commercial zones continue to build out with single family detached dwellings? Or do you want to recognize that zone for more of a commercial use with housing as an accessory use? The other one is just kind of a note here about condo plats. So previously I've limited experience with condo plats, but it would be the idea that you build a series of attached houses and then condo them off, like you can sell the unit itself and not the land. I believe previously that required like a local government's approval, and now it sounds like that's going to be just sort of a administrative thing that happens with the assessor's office. So we're sort of out of it on that one. And then single room occupancy, I think this has come up before. This was something that the previous city manager had brought up as an opportunity to create more affordable housing. So there's now a requirement that we adopt single room occupancies as part of that needed housing. One of the sort of interesting things in our code is that residential zones allow for, I think it's called rooming and boarding houses, which in theory might be single room occupancies, like a house with a bunch of individual units that are rented out. I think also they could be misinterpreted as short-term rentals. So it's a good opportunity for us to actually clarify that part of our code. So I think those are all the ones that were relevant to us, but I'm going to stop there and see if anyone has any questions specific about housing or initial thoughts. Or if I didn't cover anything from that housing omnibus bill that you still have a question about, I'm happy to try to answer it if I can.
Yeah, and a welcome word from any of you, but my personal feeling is that in reading this, it's so obscure, convoluted, that I think we need to make the housing a separate, rather than do it as part of just the cleanup bill. I'd rather, how about you guys?
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, there was a lot to it.
Yeah, and it's not clear. They don't write in normal English.
I used expressions like, huh?
That's fair. I know Bear and I were reading through some of them before this meeting and we were both like, what do we think that means? So we can also get some assistance, I think, from the state in better understanding how we apply these to our code. So if you want to push this item to the housing amendment, that'll just be a little bit later on. The thing to note is that some of these provisions, I think most of them take effect on January 1st. So if someone came in and wanted to have a single room occupancy, I am pretty sure our requirement is that we just follow state law at that point. So we wouldn't have anything in our code, but we'd be still required to follow whatever their bare minimum is.
Yeah, see, that was one of the things I was not sure of. What exactly is a single room occupancy?
Well, I think that it's when, like I said, you have a room that is for rent rather than
But does it have to have
like, it's not necessarily in a
facilities or?
No, I don't think so. The
well,
building codes have a definition for it, and I think it's more like you can rent out a room in your house as an apartment. It doesn't have to be like an accessory dwelling unit or something else.
I mean, so like somebody would rent a room and have kitchen privileges or
Yeah,
whatever.
and I think you can have like kitchenettes, like that sort of thing. I think it's almost like a studio apartment, but it could be a room in a larger house. And I can get you a definition for that. That's a good idea.
Yeah,
We can push
but
that.
anyway, that's neither here nor there.
No, that's helpful. So yeah, we'll do that in a separate code amendment process. And we'll have probably some other things that are coming out of our housing needs analysis that we'll lump in all together.
Dana, do you understand what's the rationale behind condo plots?
I'm sorry, could you say, what was your question? Could you say that?
What is your understanding of the rationale for condo plots?
I
What does that
think-
accomplish?
Sure, I think that it's another way for folks to own a home. I think that is why the state made that change.
And I think
Thank
a
you.
lot of places, the way I read it was a lot of places don't allow condos. Because, you know, you're not owning any land, all you're owning is the physical building that you're living in, they don't like them. And anyway, but that's what I picked up on, but again, it's hard this stuff is hard to understand, they don't write it clearly.
And I can get more information too about condos. We do have access to Ethan Steckmeyer, who's given a presentation to the Planning Commission before. He's the state's housing division manager. I'm sure he'd be happy to come and give a presentation about all of these rules so that we can better understand them.
Dana, do we know if the folks at the Colony and then the units that are off of Face Park Drive, do they own their land? Do we know how that is, or how that's set up?
That's a good question. I was not here during the time that those were approved. I do think, though, that those both have HOAs that then manage the land and each individual owner owns the unit itself.
Okay.
And yeah, I don't know if if that's through a condo plat or what process that was, but there's certainly good examples, local examples of how that might be accomplished. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm gonna go to the next slide. Which, I'm sorry, I think I put my presentation in a different order than what's in your packet.
I think you skipped over
Skip a
parking.
page.
Did we?
I
No,
thought-
I think hazards.
Oh,
Yeah, I just did it differently than your packet. So one of the things that we've noticed in our code is the clear and objective standards again and how they apply to our hazard overlay zone. This is one that I think I have constantly asked the state for guidance on. My feeling is that hazards are just inherently not clear and objective, like landslides and liquefaction don't really have any rhyme or reason. But we are still supposed to apply these to any properties for residential development. In an effort to limit our liability in having a decision taken to LUBA for a hazard overlay zone requirement, I think there are some changes that we can make in here. Like, for example, some of the language will say like, it should minimize, or reduce, or should be adequate. Like, those are not clear and objective. That's not what we're looking for. And I think while still recognizing again that every property is going to be different because every, we require a geotech report for every development, and whatever the development is and what is on the site, you know, where they're proposing to build, it's going to be different every time, but we can at least just make maybe more broad statements about requiring whatever it is the geotech is requiring to be included as a condition of approval, and get rid of words like minimize and just say eliminate.
Absolutely.
So I think those are some just easy changes, but I wanted to let you know that I was interested in putting them in here. And Bear, that might be something you could help with your background.
Right.
We've already had a couple examples where folks who are going through this process push back on the clear and objective standard, and I haven't gotten enough feedback from the state to know what to do other than to cross out some language that seems like it might get us in trouble. Do you have any questions about hazards? That one's sort of easy. Okay, next slide. I think this one is probably the most interesting one to have a conversation about. So parking has come up, and I did attach for you the city's parking code. From my research, what I can tell is that this parking code was like almost just completely copied from a state model code back in the day, because I think I searched something and I found, oh, the city of Medford had the same thing, and the city of Central Point. And so I think it's a great base, and then what we can do is tweak it to make the most sense for Bandon. So one of the things that's come up recently that a local church pointed out to me is that churches are required to have one space per 4 seats or 8 feet of bench length in the main auditorium. Oftentimes they have more benches than they do participants, and so their requirement is often really large. We're requiring churches in particular, it seems, to have a lot of parking when they'd like to maybe add on some other buildings that aren't their sort of main assembly area. So I'd recommend changing that. And the other thing is that I think churches are conditional uses in most of our zones. So if there was a case where you felt like they should have more parking, that's something that the Planning Commission could require during that process. So that's just sort of a funny one. I think, you know, there's some others in here, like, will we ever have a stadium? I don't know, but those are also based on seats or bench length. Another one, is the employee parking. That's a good one to talk about because I think it's really hard for us to regulate how many or know how many employees a particular business is going to have over time, especially because it could change from when they're initially approved until later on. Plus, we rely upon them to tell us how many employees they might have, and they haven't even opened their business yet. So we often get that question about like, well, how am I supposed to estimate, you know, how am I supposed to know how many employees I have? So I think there's probably a better way to deal with parking. And the other one that just came up in our most recent decision was regarding hotel parking. So I know that was a comment we got a lot throughout that process. And it is that hotels are only required to have 1 space per every 2 rooms. So there was a desire to maybe increase that. I also want to just throw out some other things you might think about because I think that there's probably 2 schools of thought. And I think there's an old school of thought about parking, that every business should be required to have a certain sort of set number of parking spaces. And then I think there's sort of a new school of thought that parking is sort of set by the business, that if it makes sense for a business to have a specific amount of parking, they're going to provide that parking because it makes the most economic sense to them. And cities sometimes set numbers that maybe exceed or they exceed the number required. So there's some folks that recommend, I mean, Urban Land Institute, Strong Towns. I know Gordon's brought up Strong Towns before. They all sort of recommend reducing or eliminating parking minimums and actually setting parking maximums instead. So you're not getting stuck with like large parking lots. I think our code, I mean, our code already allows some sort of flexibility with parking, that you can have parking 500 feet away from your business if you have an agreement, or there's an opportunity for shared parking. But those are the kinds of, I think, things that you all could think about when we're sort of opening up the parking code, if you wanted to. One of the other things that's come up that you might make a policy recommendation to the city council on is having in lieu fees. So if a particular business doesn't want to provide parking on site, but wants to utilize either on-street parking or an existing public parking lot, they could pay a fee then. So that sort of alleviates the need to have their own individual parking, and instead it's just shared with everyone in town. So I'll leave it there for just some parking ideas, and I wanted to know if, after looking through the code, if there was anything else you saw that you thought maybe we should consider, and get your initial thoughts on parking.
Are you done?
I'm done for parking.
Well, let's move on.
What?
I have a
Yeah, there's gotta be thoughts about parking.
Well, I thought we were gonna come back to it.
Well, I'm trying to give you, like, we'll talk about parking and then we'll move on to the next thing.
Oh, all right. What do you guys think about parking?
I have a question, Dana.
Yeah.
In the current code for apartment house, I assume that means an apartment,
Yes.
and it says 80% of the guest accommodations. So if you had a 10-unit apartment, the code now would require 8+1. Am I reading that right?
Well, see, I think it's a great point, because we've talked about this before, like with the 48 unit apartment building. I don't think we called it an apartment house. I think we called it a multifamily dwelling unit.
Okay.
But that's a great reason to clarify what's an apartment house versus what's a multifamily dwelling unit. But yeah, I mean, in theory, yes, you're right. If we wanted to call it an apartment, they wouldn't be required to have a parking space for each room.
Okay. Thank you.
And again, I don't. Like the apartments out there, they're gonna need at least one parking space per room. And sometimes more.
Mm.
But otherwise, they're gonna be parking up and down the streets.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's an interesting spot too, because there is no on-street parking there. You'd have to go to Billy's Smoothbore or
Yeah,
way down to Beach Loop, I think, to find a parking spot if it wasn't available on your site.
yeah, and like, I just don't see how they can put up an apartment out away from town.
Mm.
And that, I mean, it's not a comfortable walking distance from town.
No, it's not.
And I don't see how you can put up an apartment like that and not have at least one space per room. It just seems silly.
I think, yeah, that's another thing to mention that I've talked, I think, to some of you about, that the hotel thing in particular. I think that code comes from, like, if you were in Portland and you were maybe arriving by train or by plane, you wouldn't have your individual vehicle. So you may not need as many parking spaces for a hotel, but in Bandon, I think a lot of people are driving their personal vehicle, because we don't have public transportation or an airport close by. And it's not easy to get around through any other mode. So,
There isn't a train?
no, what
There's
train
a
have you been
station.
taking? Taking. Oh my gosh.
Anyway, so yeah, I think we need to do something about that.
Are we back to where the place in Seabird is going to be built for sure?
No,
No,
Okay.
no, but there's stuff gonna go
No,
up
it will
and we
happen.
need to deal with
I
it.
I thought I missed something.
No,
okay.
no, that was just an example.
No, I agree that if there's an apartment, I feel like it makes sense to require at least one parking spot per apartment.
And I don't know if we want to get into it, but my personal feeling is that those parking spots, there should be a certain number of charging units.
yes, you've said this before,
I mean,
like electric vehicle charging
Yeah,
units.
Right.
yeah,
Does the state not mandate that? I'm surprised Oregon
they
doesn't
don't.
have a directive on that. Interesting.
I thought they did.
I know that in a recent change, they required, like, all new, at least residential development, I think it has to be primed for a charging space. I'm not sure if with commercial, we could look into it if commercial is required, because that would be something we'd have to probably, or we'd want to add into our
Sure.
code, I guess.
Yeah, and we wouldn't even have to mandate that you have parking, that you have, charging stations if you just had a stub out for,
I think that's what building codes requires though, is that it's,
for electrical.
yeah, that
charging?
new development, like all new garages have like a stub for a future car charging unit,
Okay, well, I mean, that's one thing, garages. I'm talking about like a
commercial.
multi-unit,
Multi-
either a apartment building or a
Okay.
hotel or something like that should have X number of electrical vehicle charging units. And if they don't have them, especially in an apartment building, you can, the thing that they will, if you don't have the stub outs, they will never go in, ever. But if you have the stub outs, then they might go in.
We could consider something like what they do in the marina. Have a power pole, have a power post between each berth, between
Oh,
berths.
yeah.
And so it'd be right there in front of the building, and you could drive up next to it and plug in or not plug in. So it'd be right there available. So it'd come out of the structure itself underneath the sidewalk and come
Right.
up out of the sidewalk.
Exactly. Yeah. That's a good idea.
But then who's paying for the charging? If it's coming out of the building?
Oh, I'd probably be metered or,
But it should go to the person whose electric vehicle it is. It should
Right.
be metered to your home, and unless you have assigned parking, then how do you make sure you get in the right spot with the?
How does it work at our,
And yeah, how's it work?
our lot downtown? Isn't there,
Is
don't
it
you use a
paid?
credit card or
you
something?
just use a credit card, yeah.
Maybe a similar process.
That's what I was thinking, something like that, or have your room card, that you plug in and so they know.
Hmm.
Cause I think most apartments have cards now, don't they?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that'd be more than a stub out, though. That'd be like a whole system at that point.
no, it would be, but I'm saying a minimum would require having the stub out in all of these spaces that Don's talking and Bill are talking about. So that eventually you could put it in if people want it.
Okay, I'm gonna tell you what, they created a new law or something, maybe in the last couple of years, that requires each building at a minimum, provide electrical service capacity, for these types of, vehicles at commercial buildings under private ownership, multifamily residential buildings with 5 or more residential dwellings, or mixed-use buildings consisting of privately owned commercial space and 5 or more dwelling units. So I think, it's sort of getting at, I think, what you're asking for. It is saying that you have to have capacity and be ready to serve charging for electric vehicles at all of those uses. I don't know if it requires that you offer it, but that you build it into the infrastructure when you're constructing that new building.
Mhm.
Because I think probably to Catherine's point, like, it's up to the property owner whether they want to offer that or not.
So that's already in the building code.
Yes. Yeah.
The stub outs.
Yeah, that when they're building any new building, they're providing capacity for it to be installed in the future if it's not being installed at that time, like the actual units themselves. That's my understanding.
And to reduce brain damage, just make it a credit card accessible.
Right.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
So it doesn't matter
Who uses?
who you're visiting or who's using it.
Right. And if an apartment guy wanted to do it, they could make their room keys,
That's also, because that's essentially a credit card.
yeah. Okay,
Okay, that's it for parking. Does everyone at least like the idea of getting rid of the employee requirement and maybe easing up on churches a little bit?
Sure.
I would think there's some industry standard that would tell us what estimated staff size would be based on the parameters of the development. So I don't know if we necessarily want to completely do away with that. I mean, my personal experience from the people that clean our vacation rental dwelling that's on our street if there's 3 people there cleaning, there's 3 cars. If there's 2 people, there's 2. I've never seen folks carpool, but that's just an isolated
Mhm.
observation. It might be in a larger development, maybe there would be carpooling or it would be encouraged. I think people up here don't necessarily believe in carpooling like
No.
some communities might.
Yeah, I think we're just so small too.
Right,
You're not
fair.
necessarily gonna carpool from Seabird Drive to Old Town.
And we're small enough that some of us walk to work in the nice weather.
Mhm.
I mean,
Or
Yeah.
right about.
Yeah,
And carpooling, you'd probably have to drive just as far to get to the pool as you would to go into town.
that's a good suggestion though, and from what I have looked up, there are some entities that are already sort of providing maybe more updated standards than what we have now. So I'll look into those and see if any of them are still based on employees or if they can give us an idea. The thing that I always think about is if someone comes here and they have a large scale business that none of us have ever been involved in, how are we supposed to know if
Right.
what they are saying that they're going to have is correct? Because we're just sort of relying upon their word versus like what they're showing you in a plan and that you can actually calculate. But I think that that's a great idea if we had a resource that kind of
Okay.
shared what the average employee might be. Look at that. All right, can you go to the next slide? I just had some other things that were not in the packet, but I wanted to bring up. One is considering allowing, so our code right now doesn't allow many home occupation uses. I forget exactly what it says, but it's something like you can't have any exterior like visual display of having a business other than a very small nameplate. So I usually think about it like, you know, you could be a CPA that works from home that advertises that you're a CPA or something very similar, but you can't have people coming and going at all. You can't have work trucks parked out there. It's been on my list of something that I love the Planning Commission to consider changing to allow for maybe a type 1 and type 2 home occupation process, but that we always seem to have really much more important things to do. But one of the things you might consider is allowing offices as an accessory use. So in certain zones that might make sense for you guys. So because our code allows it or calls offices out as a specific individual use, if they're not in a zone, then you can't have them. So for example, the CD2 zone, like the jetty, does not allow you to have a professional office there. But there are probably some areas where it might make sense if there's like above a garage, or I know of one house that has like a funny little guest suite in the front that might be an appropriate place to have an office. So anyway, just wanted to throw it out there as something that you might do to allow some flexibility without completely opening up the home occupation code. And I would recommend if you did do that, do it as it has to be accessory to another like outright permitted use or residential or commercial use. I think the reason why you wouldn't allow it outright is that you don't just want a bunch of offices in residential neighborhoods or even commercial neighborhoods just sort of walking along and walking office to office, but it could be something that might help out some folks who are trying to have offices and in places where we don't otherwise allow home occupations. Any thoughts on that one? Or would you rather we just amend the home occupation code and make it a little easier?
I'm a little confused as to whether or not you're saying an office could be in a residential zone. I'm a little confused.
Well, just convert a space to a physical office. Like if someone had an outbuilding or another structure that they could site a professional office there.
And there wouldn't be any limitation. I mean, if it's an office, you have to assume somebody might come to you as customers.
Yes, and so I'm talking about like, I think in the CD1 zone or the CD2 zone, we already allow commercial retail sales and services, but we don't allow offices. So if you wanted to, and we don't because offices are called out specifically like being separate from commercial retail sales and services. So if you wanted to be able to allow someone to have an office in one of those zones, That isn't necessarily turning an entire home into an office, but turning a portion of a home into an office or turning a portion of a business into an office or a commercial building into an office. That's something you might consider to provide some flexibility.
But
And-
you're also implying that there's gonna be some kind of sign to point out that this has an office space.
Yes, there could be. Right now, if you have a home occupation, I think it's like a 1 foot or 2 square foot nameplate. So you could, yeah, it's just really like the small sign, but I think of even, and this might be revolting, but like a friend of mine growing up, his dad had a dental office in the downstairs of their house, or just sort of those small scale offices. I think of, you might be able to incorporate into those neighborhoods, still accessory to an outright permitted use.
Then we have to deal with parking and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, you would have to deal with parking. Just an idea to allow some flexibility. We don't have to put it in here. The other one that's come up that's been on my list is retaining walls and fences. Our code is so limited in how it describes them, and I am gonna open to what it says, but it essentially says like a retaining wall is not a fence, and then that's all it says. So when we get questions about how to yeah, it says retaining wall, these standards in the fence and wall standards do not apply to a device used to buttress earth such as a retaining wall or riprap. So we've gotten this question before that people want to build retaining walls somewhere on their property, and there are no standards around what might apply when they build a retaining wall. Is it a structure? Is it a fence? Is it a wall? Is it nothing? Do we allow it in a setback? Do we require it to be out of the setback? I think there's some room here to give staff a little bit more direction about how we should be treating retaining walls in general. And then fences, so sort of an interesting thing, but when we talk about like where you can have a fence, it says that your front yard, which we consider to be the area, the first 20 feet of your front yard, because that's our minimum setback requirement. It has to be 4 feet there, and then it moves to 6 feet. And then in the rear yard, it can be 8 feet, and you can also have it like on your side property line for the back 10 feet, because that's technically the rear yard. And so it just ends up making things, I think, look a little bit weird, to be honest. And it may make more sense. I've done a little bit of research on fences that, your side yard is the side of your house. So any part of the house that is on the side, that's the side yard. Any part in the front, whether it's 20 feet or more, would be considered the front yard. The other idea is we get a lot of questions about adding trellises onto the top of your fence to allow for, let's say, like roses or some other pretty thing to grow. We don't allow that. So there might be some opportunity to allow for a taller fence, maybe up to 8 feet tall, even on the side, or doing some sort of graduated increase, or at least allowing some people to put up something other than just a really straight fence. Any thoughts on fences and retaining walls?
The problem that I have with fences is the way that I see a lot of them around the city is the pickets are so close together that with the wind conditions and everything, they've had to reinforce or put up additional buttressing on the fence to keep the fence from turning into a glorified sail. And so the fences aren't really done for the conditions of the environment. And you end up reinforcing the fence structure itself, which either impedes into the property or goes outside the property line. So that's another thing to consider on just how big a fence you want. And the taller it is, the more the wind is going to have an impact on it.
Mm-hmm.
And the last thing you need is for your fence to fly over in your neighbor's house, which it could do.
Actually, that last spring, one big windstorm, I saw a lot of fences in the neighbors' yards.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
The fences aren't built right to begin with.
But
So you start saying you want them higher, you got to consider the conditions.
So is a hedge considered a retaining wall or a fence?
It's not considered either, which we've gotten that complaint before too, is that folks will cut down their very tall hedge and hope that they can put in a fence that replaces the hedge, especially in a front yard. And you cannot, you can only have a 4-foot tall fence, which we get complaints about a lot. So that's really not tall enough to provide any sort of windbreak, or if you have a dog, that can be really challenging if you only really have a front yard. It's not tall enough. So we do recommend that folks, if they want something that's taller than 4 feet or 6 feet or 8 feet, to plant landscaping.
They're better off with the hedge.
Mm-hmm.
And with deer as well, the 4-foot fence.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Useless.
Yeah. Well, why don't you all think about it and walk around town and see what looks good or what doesn't look good, or what you'd like to see more of or not. I think there are some examples in town where there are taller fences that work, and then there are examples in town where taller fences blow over really quickly. And I'll remind you, we can't regulate good taste, and we also can't regulate good construction, but we can at least try to regulate what stuff looks like.
I will tell you that the first winter I was here, I had an 8-foot fence in the backyard, and they were like this. And it was reinforced on the inside of the yard. And the wind took off 2 posts at ground level and laid the fence down in my yard, because it was an 8-foot fence.
yeah.
Our climate is not conducive to many things, so.
But to me, I kind of like the height restrictions, because having an 8-foot or even a 6-foot fence in front of your house, to me, is antisocial. It's not, it doesn't make the town welcoming. You know, as people are looking around, it makes it like there are all these little compounds all over the place that you know, who knows what's back there? But anyway, I like the 4 feet in front.
I agree.
I agree.
I think, and one more thing on fencing that I think is kind of interesting is our code. We've noticed this on corner lots that, so on a corner lot, the front yard is considered the narrower of the two, and it doesn't matter which way you face your house. And so there can be examples where the front yard is really someone's side yard, and it is then a 4-foot tall fence there. And it looks, I mean, it makes sense if you're coming down a street and you want all the houses to have a 4-foot tall fence along that street. But corner lots are sort of a unique situation where it might look good, but it might not really work out well. So it's just something to think about in contemplating how we might amend the fence code
Okay,
specific to corner.
And real quick, Dana.
Yeah.
so we have no code. If someone wanted to build a retaining wall, you said you get questions about that. Wouldn't they have an engineering report or an engineering drawing?
Yes, and they do. I think one of the questions we've had is, so one of the unique things about fences is that you can build them on the property line. So they're a structure that gets to be built on the property line. It says in here, retaining walls are not fences and not walls. And so our question is, well, can you build them on the property line or not? Or do they have to be set in 10 feet, let's say, from the rear? Because we don't actually know how to treat them.
Mhm. Thank you.
So,
Would it depend on what the purpose of the retaining wall is? I mean, wouldn't it make sense that it would have to be almost like, if we can't really, I feel like we can't really just put a distance if it's really needed a certain place in the yard?
well, usually the retaining wall, if it's used to like buttress earth and hold like a foundation up, let's say. I mean, I think that's where we can say the retaining wall has to be in 10 feet from your rear yard setback. We could make that requirement, but it probably, like for engineering purposes, doesn't have to be there. So it's just up to us whether or not you want to consider a retaining wall to it's not a fence or a wall, but is it a structure that can be located in a setback or not? If that makes sense. Cause I think I get what you're saying is like, I as staff don't really get to judge where a retaining wall goes. An engineer tells you how
Right.
tall it has to be, how much weight it has to hold, if it has to have drainage in it, but we can regulate where on the property it can or can't be, and that might also dictate how someone builds their house.
Okay.
I've seen them in the front yard too, like if you have I think there's a couple examples in older areas of Bandon where there's like, you know, a walkway and then some steps and there's a cute retaining wall and then it's back, but
There's a lot of those.
I don't even know if someone wanted to do that now. I'm not sure how I would. I'd bring it to you guys and say, what do you want to do? So it'd be great to get that clarification here.
Sure.
What about the retaining walls on the new home being built on Beach Loop? They have like a series of retaining walls. How is that handled?
That was not part of their plans, I don't think. I did just see that. So, I think luckily you guys made, changes in the code recently that allow structures less than 30 inches to be located in setbacks as long as it's, maintaining a minimum of 5-foot setbacks. So there probably are some examples that fall under that, but I think that's a great example of if they did show me that on a plan, I'm not sure how I would, what we would do. Because our code just said, all it says, the only thing in the code, if you do a search for retaining wall, it just says these standards don't apply. And then that's it, but what standards do apply, we don't know, so. It'd just be great to get some feedback there to know how you guys think it should be handled on a property like that.
Just kind of slid under your desk there. And
Oh, I mean, lots of things happen around here. Unfortunately, I'm always at my desk and I don't always get out to see what's going on.
It's impossible to do everything.
I know. Okay, so then the only other thing on my list for the code cleanup was also, I think most of you guys were on the commission when we initially looked at reorganizing the code. It's still of interest to me. And for those of you not on the commission at the time, the idea was instead of having a different chapter for every zone or use, that we would have a table
I like that.
that said all the zones and then what the height is in that zone and what the front yard setback is in that zone, et cetera, so that it was a little bit easier to determine what the difference would be between each zone.
And
Oh, yeah.
one of the other reasons was when you read the code now, you'll read, okay, R1, just a whole bunch of stuff there. Then you read R2 and it's just as long with 99.9% the same thing.
And they have to go back to R1 to see what the difference is.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
And then if someone will get the question of, well, where can I do this? And then I have to look through every single zone to find out which ones allow it. So,
I think a graph thing, I'm all for that because I've read through that and it takes forever.
Mhm.
And would like, I would like to see it, okay. R1, here's what you can do,
yeah, I think so. We can put that together for you. I think we have brought it to you before as a draft and we haven't ever actually made the change. But I also hope that one of the things that comes out of that is seeing that a lot of the standards throughout every zone are almost the same.
Right.
And so, when we originally created the controlled development zones, there was the requirement to have the geotech reports within that zone and it applied to every property. And when we created the hazard overlay zone, we took that requirement out and we said it only applies to properties in which it should apply. And then it sort of made those CD zones no different than an R1 zone or an R2 zone. There's a lot of the same things allowed. So at least in terms of like lot coverage and setbacks and height. So I think also it'll kind of tee us up to have a housing conversation of, are there areas where setbacks should be wider, where setbacks should be smaller, where we can allow more density or less density. I think it'll be much easier to have that conversation having it at a table.
Yeah, I'm all for the tables.
Great.
Yeah, and I forgot, you did present one time. It was just for a couple of them, but it was really nice.
That was a really long meeting though. I think that was like a
Yeah.
3-hour meeting, so I gave up on it after that. But we can bring it back.
Yeah, actually, I probably still have it
I'm
somewhere.
sure you do. I will make new copies of it, especially now that we also teed up the code to do that sort of thing by aligning all of the uses throughout the zones. So we gave them all the same name so we could more easily put them into tables. So should be easier this time around. And my last question for you is, did I miss anything? Is there anything else that you've been thinking about over the last year that you feel like needs to go into this code cleanup?
Gorse.
Of course, we just need to clean it up.
Need to clean up the gorse.
Yeah. Okay. You can end the presentation.
Okay. We are ending, this is that, I guess we're done with our presentation by staff. Dana?
Yeah.
And
And then we do have one more work session topic on here. That's not code cleanup. Before you hurry on to the next thing.
Oh, master plan developments.
Yeah.
Yes, that we discussed earlier. Yes. But does anybody have, before we move on, does anybody have any comments on any of the things we just discussed on the parking, on the housing? Anybody have any strong feelings or obvious things that we missed? No.
I just have a broad question, which is, so the state is mandating these changes beginning January 1st or 2nd or 3rd, whatever it is. And I'm assuming that municipalities have to defer to state law.
Yep.
And so it doesn't look like we're going to be prepared, you know, in terms of the code. The Bandon's code is not going to match. We're not going to have enough time to have it match changes in state law. So how do we handle that?
Yeah, so I mean, this has happened in the past, like the accessory dwelling unit stuff is a good example. We did not get our act together and pass an ordinance until pretty way after it was required by state law. So we did have some folks who applied prior to then. And what happened was staff just applied the sort of minimum mandatory language required by law, but not any of the nuances that the planning commission later approved. So there is going to sort of be an open period, I think, if people want to apply for something that would fall under one of those housing omnibus things, we would be required to only apply the minimum standard. So we'd essentially look at the ORS for that guidance.
Right. And it was mentioned earlier, just that we have to defer to those no matter what. And so we will have to know them, you know, what, and Dana, because when things come in, you know, you'll have to know, even if they're not in our code. So
People let us know when there are laws that are not in our code. And Shayla is the one who helps us with that.
I'm aware of
so,
that,
Yeah.
been told.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just give you a sort of a brief overview of the like land use in Oregon when it started. They used to do something called periodic review, and I think it was like every 5 years, the state would give cities a list of all the rules that changed during that 5-year period, and then they had to provide plans as to how they were going to update their codes, and then the state checked to make sure it matched. And apparently, from what I've heard, that process was really cumbersome and time consuming, although it did make sure everyone's codes were up to date. But they discontinued that practice sometime in the early 2000s. So our first code cleanup that we did was sort of like a 20-year cleanup. I mean, I was finding all these things that had passed in like 2002 that our code didn't address. So I'm not worried if it takes us 6 months to change something. I think I'm more worried about the things that were passed 20 years ago that we're probably still missing. So that was also part of, we did apply for some funding from the state to do a code audit that would check to make sure that we've met all of those and probably also incorporate the new stuff. And we are waitlisted for that funding. So that's also why I've sort of pushed off our housing amendment until we find out more about the funding. But that should help, having a professional who knows what they're doing.
waitlisted, WEIGHT.
Not quite. No, I mean, not surprisingly, no, the state, all of their funds for code assistance were.
No, I understand.
yeah.
I was trying to add a little levity to the
Mm.
meeting here.
Always. I appreciate it. I'll keep you posted though if we do get any funding.
Okay. So if none of you have any comments on those things. Master plan developments, did you all read that stuff?
There's no way you got through all of it because I didn't even.
I
read through
didn't
all of
get
it.
through all of it. I did try, but I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah, and so just to give folks who are listening in a sort of broad overview, the idea is that if you have a large swath of land, I think it's generally 10 acres or more, that might be more appropriately zoned with some flexibility in mind. You can essentially allow that 10-acre parcel to propose their own zoning, provided that they sort of check some boxes that might be beneficial to the city. So it's slightly different than the planned unit development, because our planned unit development code is like, I think more of like a subdivision code versus this would be more like a zoning code. So you might allow mixed uses, you might allow more commercial and residential close by. You might also allow like more dense development in one area and less dense development in another. I think there are opportunities to play with height allowances or modifying the transportation standards, like if you wanted to allow more trails, or if you wanted to allow skinny streets or, little on-street parking areas. Anyway, I'm just giving you a bunch of ideas. But from what I've read, some of the reasons why you might allow this is for affordable housing projects. So you might give a developer the flexibility to propose their own zoning if a portion of their project is dedicated to long-term affordable or workforce housing. You might do it. We just had a project that proposed gold weed certification of structures if there was an opportunity for folks to have more environmentally friendly design. You might give them some flexibility in how that works. I provided to you a bunch of examples. So one would be the model code from DLCD. That was what we used for a lot of our last code updates. And that was their suggestion. It encourages innovative planning that results in projects that benefit the community. And that's where they said, housing options, energy efficiency, maybe better public facility plans, that sort of thing.
Dana, one thing
Yeah.
that in reading it through, I remember, it's too thick. I don't even remember exactly where it was. But talking about that would be especially appropriate around here is working around riparian or come on, water areas.
Wetlands, yeah.
Wetlands. And so that you could, if you had to work around some wetlands, you could kind of put some houses closer together.
Sure.
And stuff to make up for the what you're losing in the wetlands, and then they'd be less expensive homes too. So anyway, I thought that one struck me a lot.
I think
right
that's
there.
wonderful too, because the donut hole has tons
Yes.
of wetland
Yes.
in it. So it's a good opportunity to recognize that that's a constraint for building in that area.
But they aren't under our jurisdiction.
No, but if there was someone who owned a large piece of property that wanted to annex in and propose zoning specific to whatever made the most sense to develop that area, that also gives you all the flexibility in making recommendations about what that could look like.
Right, anyway.
And in a way that benefits the city.
So that was one of the things that struck me and some of the other ones is you could put, if you did it right, and I've seen this happen before, is you could have a couple of small stores in a neighborhood so people wouldn't have to drive.
Yeah.
Way the heck over to do that and things like that I think master plan, well, I told you that when I retired, I was working in a planned community but it was 4,500 acres right next to Salt Lake City. So, but we put in a 65-acre lake and all kinds of stuff, but it had some commercial areas in it. And I mean, just planned communities can be, or master planned communities can be really, really cool. And then plus then the guy can control the type of like architecture, so that the lead guy there can say, you know, we want houses of this style, and then has to approve the plans for the houses that go in there, so that there's some kind of commonality. There's a theme that runs through it, and it's really, really cool. And if it's big enough, you could have, you know, one theme here and another theme over there. And anyway, I'm all for master plan communities.
Sounds like what they did at Hilton Head.
Oh, did they?
Hilton Head was very well designed.
I think some other examples, just to keep the juices flowing, would be, I've heard that Bend has done some of these examples where they've taken into consideration wildfire hazards and put some specific requirements like extra defensible space or extra requirements on properties, to just sort of manage stuff. So I think of gorse in the donut hole too, being something that we might want to further manage. The other option would be like if you had a big swath of land and you didn't want to put in hard gray infrastructure for, let's say, storm drainage, and you wanted to mitigate it all on site. That's also something that could be covered under a master plan like that, which would be a benefit to the city because we have limited ability to manage storm drainage. So I think there's lots of options.
Oh, yeah.
You
Were
know,
you gonna say?
We were talking about Disney World earlier, and I'm.
Oh,
thinking
yeah.
Celebration Village, or there's a town.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Master plan town
Yeah.
right there.
That was under Disney control, and then
Yeah.
they got, and then we won't get into the politics, but they.
Hmm.
Oh, anyway,
So it sounds like you, I mean, we talked about it during the joint planning commission city council work session, and there was some interest in including it on your list of things to do this year. I'm hearing that you like it and that there are some reasons why we might consider it. I think what I'm looking for is, are there any, like if we wrote out, if you, let's say, had a checklist of what it was you wanted them to accomplish as part of having this master plan development, like what are some things that you might want? Do you get what I'm saying? Like if you wanted them to provide workforce housing or dot. I think that would be really helpful to staff to sort of figure out how we might craft this code for you. You don't have to answer that today if you don't want.
wouldn't, it seems to me you'd have to go by the individual master plan, because they're gonna want different things in different areas. Like I say, the wetlands may be one, you know, problem that they can solve with a master plan. And in another area, it might be availability of, say, commercial or stormwater, or, you know, that each one would, I don't think you could.
So like, I'll give you an example of in the model code, what they have is that whatever they wanted to do had to provide a net benefit to the public by sort of checking one or more of the following boxes.
Oh, okay.
So that's, I guess, what I'm getting at. So you could have something that says like, you know, avoids wetlands, like that, good, they checked a box. So it's just, what do you want to get out of it? Why would we have a master plan process?
Okay, I see.
Yeah, that sort of thing. Cause I think you're right. You don't want to make it rigid. The whole idea is it provides flexibility.
Right.
Dana, does the city have a definition published on what Bandon considers workforce housing? It's
No, because I think it's kind of a moving target.
so variable. Everyone
Yeah.
likes to throw that out, but no one likes to, that I've heard, likes to identify exactly what it is and how we can ensure it.
I think that it would be really tough. And I mean, certainly the city council could maybe every year evaluate what is workforce housing this year, because I think it does change. But I think generally the concept is like, what does your workforce need? And that could be like income restricted housing, or, you know, requirements to work in Bandon, that, you know, you wouldn't provide workforce housing to folks who are working up in Coos Bay just because they want to live here. So I think like those are all part of workforce housing. But I think as far as setting you know, what does it look like? Is it just apartments or is it houses to buy? Like, I think that is different based on which sector of the workforce you're looking at too. So yeah, I mean, you're right. I think all of us avoid putting any sort of concrete pin in what workforce housing is, but because there are so many opportunities to address it, I would hate for us to box ourselves into like only this is workforce housing. If
Well,
that
and
makes sense.
a lot of them use it for percentage of average income in, you know, across a certain spectrum of the population, you know, here it could be all service, average income from service people. You can't pay more than 35% of your income for housing or whatever, but I've seen those kinds of numbers too before. So it's still gonna change year to year.
Yeah, I mean, I also think like our workforce is caddies and it's folks who are serving coffee and it's folks working at you know, hotels, but it's also teachers and nurses and
Right.
those probably have pretty different salaries and equally struggle to find housing in our community.
One of these referred to an employment plan, to come up with an employment. plan as
Yeah.
Part of the process.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I'll have to read it more closely.
Yeah,
Just one thing I picked out of it.
yeah, I think that was, I think I gave you the example of the city of Bend and they had that you
Yeah.
could have like a sort of minor employment portion of it. So I think that's interesting. But yeah, so, Bill, do you think it would like be more beneficial to set, especially for a master plan community, set more parameters around what workforce housing is rather than having it be a sort of nebulous term?
I think we're headed down a legal rat hole. When you try to, because I think, I don't know how we guarantee that folks that are earning, you know, $36,000 or $40,000 a year, how we guarantee that they can afford housing legally. Worry about inexpensive housing being used by people for second vacation homes. I think that's certainly not the intent there. So and once again, the more you talk about it, I think the more legalities arise on something like that, unless you have a situation like a Mr. Kaiser that owns the property, owns the buildings, and can set his own standards. But I don't think that's something the city necessarily is in a position to do. But yeah, it's not I don't have an answer. Yeah, I don't know that anybody does.
Yeah, and I think
And you said, somebody said something about you have to be working in Bandon, so if you lose your job, you lose your house.
I mean, that's the sort of tough thing. The city's got the housing project that they're working on with the school district. And I know those sorts of things were tossed around because that will be, from what I understand, deed restricted workforce housing. So the idea is what I talked about, you know, having to work for a place in Bandon would be on there. And that's come up as well, that, you know, if you lose your employment, you do lose your housing. I mean, that's just how it would work.
That's the way it is in my daughter's neighborhood in Ophir, Colorado.
Yeah. And I think that's a hard thing when we have really limited housing in the area, but if you are committed to housing the folks who are making up your employment sector, then I think that's sort of what you're obligated to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's challenging.
Yeah, I lived in what used to be a company town. And there it was definitely, you lost your job, you lost your house.
So I heard avoiding wetlands and waters, riparian areas, providing for mixed use, workforce housing, or some maybe undefined workforce housing. We don't know what that is, but anything else that you think you'd want to accomplish or that you'd want to be a public benefit?
I think some of it was flexibility of the type of housing.
Oh, yeah.
Like even things that we don't have currently defined in our code. Yeah.
Cardboard shacks, you know, things like
Anything.
that.
The other thing you might include in there is like walking paths or additional
space.
public green space, public spaces.
Good.
I would definitely include everything in the model code.
Yeah, you like all of those?
Yeah.
Okay,
They have open space,
Yeah,
Improve.
oh, yeah, they,
transportation
Yeah.
connectivity.
For sure.
great. Yeah. I know the model code is good. I just always think like, are there things that we should tweak for Bandon? And I do think it's sort of interesting. The one thing I would hate to see us do is go as far as Bend has gone to have so many requirements that it sort of feels like it unbalances the flexibility. Like the
Right.
whole purpose is that there's flexibility, but if there's so many barriers, people aren't going to take advantage of it. And I think that's sort of what's happened with our plan unit development code. I've heard that from some folks that it's overly burdensome. So it provides flexibility in one area, but then is overly burdensome in another. So people aren't taking advantage of it. So,
Dana, what's going on, if anything, with the, I think Dan called it the zone of opportunity, the
yeah, the
area south
abandoned
of town?
opportunity site.
Opportunity site, is
Yeah.
that still mired down in the wetlands
Yes.
issue?
From what I understand, there was a second wetland delineation that had to be done. I'm not sure if the first one ever got completed. I know there were some issues trying to get through that process. But the second wetland delineation had more positive results, it seems. So I think there's still, that's forward progress, but it's not moving as fast as any of us ever hope it would. But that's a site that could
That would
be, yeah. So I think that's the other thing to think about is like how many acres is enough acres to propose your own zoning? I think some of them had 10 and some had 20 and some had 40. So
10 seems kind of small.
I don't know how maybe I'll do some like mapping exercises of how much is 10 acres. And if you looked at like a swath of Bandon, what would that look like? We could do that, check it out. But you think 10 seems too small?
10 seems awful small to me.
What seems like the right size?
I would say, I mean, just from, seems to me a minimum of 15 to 20
Well, it does say 20 acres in here.
In the
on
model
on
code?
one of them, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think everyone kind of has a different thing, but we could look at our city and take some different areas that might apply for this and figure out how big they are, and you can go from there and see if it makes it seems like it would make sense for them to have their own zoning or not.
Yeah,
Well, that area off of 20th was what, 19 acres? 17 or
I think it's
19 acres?
17 acres. Yeah.
yeah, it seems like it ought to be big enough. I mean, there's a lot of wetlands there, but
Hmm.
that would be one reason to do it. So you
Mhm.
could
Mhm.
work around the wetlands and still get your homes in there.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know there's another piece of land west and sort of south of the Harvard Street Apartments. There's a big space. I'm not sure how many acres it is, but that's one that we've entertained lots of requests on, but never seems to go anywhere. And I feel like this may be the type of application that helps move the needle on development for that parcel. And I would guess that's also somewhere between like 10 and 15 acres.
Yeah,
So-
that,
Something else that just came up to me, I know the city is struggling with what to do with RVs
Mm-hmm.
and whether they can live in RVs. Maybe that's something that could be included. And
That's a great idea.
Have an RV area dedicated to just RVs,
Mm-hmm.
and they come and go and be a transitional area.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea to include RVs. And then the other thing that I, at a recent conference I was at, they were talking about tiny homes on wheels, which is another thing that lots of people, we get that call a lot. Like, I have a tiny home on wheels, where can I put it? And not in the city of Bandon, like we don't allow that kind of thing. Because it's technically,
That's a good one, yeah.
it's considered an RV. So I
Yeah.
think that's a great idea to consider allowing something like that.
Good idea.
Okay. I think that's good for now. So maybe what we can do is for the next work session that we have on this, draft maybe just some, like, use the model code, which it sounds like people liked, and start making some tweaks to make it feel a little bit more like Bandon. And then maybe this is something that we bring to the city council to sort of review the public benefit portion and some of your initial ideas. We'll bring it to them in a work session before we initiate it for a public hearing. Does that sound good?
sounds good.
Okay,
Yeah, I was just gonna mention, I've been reading some articles about tiny homes. You know, a tiny home isn't necessarily a cheap home.
No,
No.
Yeah, wow.
No.
Have you guys seen?
Pricey, no, I haven't priced it.
Oh, I've little, what are they? 300-400 square foot home, $80,000?
Yeah, yeah.
Or more, I think
Or more,
Yeah, I
yeah,
think
over
that's-
100 sometimes.
that's the low end.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the other thing that I think Sherry McGrath has brought up previously is that tiny homes fall under the International Specialty Code and not the Oregon Residential Code. So anything under 400 feet has to be sprinkled or has to have some other fire suppression, whereas homes over 400 square feet don't, which I find very interesting.
Weird.
So yeah, Oregon just treats them, I mean, they created a path for them through adopting the International Specialty Code, but they're not cheap for that reason too, that if you have something under 400 square feet, you have this extra thing to figure out. I know. Yeah. Yeah.
You gotta fit a lot of stuff in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've seen some, I mean, some of them are just beautiful and well thought out. And yeah, anyway. We won't get into that tonight.
Yeah. Well, that's good. Thank you guys for providing so much feedback on these initial amendments.
Does the planning commission have a report?
Yeah, that was funny. I just was realizing before the meeting that I didn't make it in here, but I can at least tell you about some stuff that's going on.
That's fine.
So one of the things, I can't remember if I brought it up last time, but we started to see an increase in the number of permits coming in, sort of oddly at the end of summer, and now we had a slow summer, which for staff was really nice while we were catching up on other things. But it was a little alarming to have, I think we had over 60 permits for new single family dwellings last year. And I think in August, we had like 14. So we've had quite a few more come in, and we've been talking to folks who are ready to hand in more permits. So we are seeing an increase. I don't have the exact number for you. Nikki might know that more than I do. But one of the things that is sort of a little bit of a holdup in issuing permits is the water system development charges. So that was adopted, a new rate schedule was adopted at the city council meeting, which has increased system development charges for water. So before, every single family detached dwelling was just a base rate of $13,750. Under the new model, those the system development charges for wastewater, storm drainage, and transportation have all stayed the same, and I think are about $7,200-ish. And then the new way that we're calculating water SDCs is based on the heated square footage of the home. So if you have a bigger home, you're paying more in water SDCs. And if you have a smaller home, you're paying less. But we're now having to do an extra calculation. And some of the numbers are coming out pretty high. So we are working internally to figure out how we help people get through that process. I think just an example, like an 18 or 19 square foot house, instead of paying $6,500. Yeah, sorry.
18 or 19 square feet?
Sorry, hundreds, 18 or 1900 square feet, my bad. Yeah, a very tiny house, a really small house.
A closet.
18 or 1900 square foot house went from paying $6,546 for their water SDC to about, I think it's 12,000. So it doubled in price for that size home. So anyway, just want to keep you on the loop on that one. We are also in the midst of our transportation system plan. So we do have surveys available. I'm curious if anyone's taken it yet for the transportation system plan and for the beach access connector. I have gotten some feedback on those surveys that they're a little bit hard to use if you've never done one before. And it was the first time we did an online open house. So the way it works is you scroll through it, you get a little sort of presentation, and then you're asked to answer a number of questions. If you didn't realize that you had to click on the questions in order to scroll through them, I did hear from a lot of people that they did not actually answer the questions because they did not realize. And then there's a portion where there's a map and you can put little pins on things, which was also, I heard, challenging for folks. So I'd be interested to hear your
I
feedback.
did it and I got confused, but
Sorry.
I pressure ahead.
Yeah. Did you, Did you do it though?
I did it.
Okay. Did you feel like it would have been helpful if there was like a tutorial or like a
Maybe,
video of me
Maybe,
doing
I
it?
don't mind experimenting with software, so I was able to get through it.
Oh, that's good.
Sure, other people would have the patience.
No, I think that's what I've heard from some people is it's not, it hasn't been easy. And they haven't had the patience to do it, to figure it out. Anyone else?
I did it to
Okay.
the best of my ability.
Well, it was our first time doing it. I think if we do one again, we'll probably have some sessions at the library where staff can walk people through it. It's not too late to do that. There isn't really a hard close date for it. So if you haven't taken it yet, this is your reminder to go on there and fill it out. I know some of you have been really excited about a pathway on Beach Loop Drive, so I think this is just a great opportunity to provide input. And just finally, the Parks and Rec Commission is doing a tree planting event on Saturday. This is part of their annual Tree City USA obligation to keep the number of trees per capita at a certain rate. We're planting 165 new trees in City Park. And then the following week on Green Friday, which is November 24th, Friends of Bandon Parks and Recreation is doing a tree planting event in Johnson Creek Park. So both of those can be found, I believe, on the city's website.
When we're all still vomiting from Thanksgiving.
Gross. Is that what you do after Thanksgiving?
I'm leading a hike that day.
No, I don't.
Yeah, good. Well, you're welcome to attend either or neither. It's up to you. And other than that, I hope you all have a really happy Thanksgiving.
You as well.
Thank you. And if anyone has any questions for me, I'm happy to answer them.
What are we doing about December?
So you canceled the December meeting,
Okay.
so we are not meeting in December, and we will meet again for our regularly scheduled January meeting.
And at that time, will we be doing the aquaculture session?
Yes. Oh, thank you for reminding me. So I did initially hope to have the public hearing for you tonight, but we did not notice it in time, so we could not put it on the agenda. So there are some requirements around noticing that we missed to get it up on the city's website. So I will reschedule it for the January meeting.
Okay.
Thank you for bringing that up.
You're welcome.
Looking forward to that one.
Yes, I know. I had hoped we could do it tonight. I'm sorry that with all the gravel point stuff, my brain forgot to notice for this one.
Imagine that.
I know. All right. And I can't remember, I think Nikki was here last time, but if you haven't met our new staff, we have 2 new staff members, Nikki Klein, she's over there at the computer, wave Nikki. She was on our Parks and Rec Commission previously and is now serving as our planning assistant, and Jason Kroll, who's been the city's vegetation management coordinator for the last year or so, is now also going to be doing 10 hours of planning work for us, which isn't a lot, but it's super helpful. His 10 hours is like someone else's 40. He's really incredible. And he'll be working on all of our sort of natural resource and open space stuff. So you'll hear from him at future meetings. He'll be working on our grant-funded Beaches and Dunes overlay project.
Cool.
Yes,
Good guy, hard
right.
worker.
yes. Oh, yeah, Bear knows him.
Yeah.
Can vouch for him.
Of course.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay, we have. That should do it for most of the business. Commissioners, would anybody have anything they'd like to bring up or discuss? Don,
No.
Bill?
Just thanks to the Bandon staff team again for everything, and to everyone that attends the meetings in person and online. And I just had a question, has anyone noticed, or is it just me? Is there a proliferation of no trespassing signs popping up around town, or is no one's noticed that but me? Okay.
I've seen a few.
Seems like there's a lot in the last several months.
Where?
people-
Well, name it.
Private property.
Really? Where?
Private
Is that because of the
property.
homeless?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
I've seen a number of them.
Riverside Drive's posted in several places now.
Oh, yes.
I
Seen that.
should have brought up if I had written a planning department report, that was included. I would have also told you that there was a change in the recreational immunity laws, which could be part of it. So very briefly, up in the city of Newport, a woman was walking from a trail in a parking lot out to the beach. My understanding is she slipped and fell. She sued the city, which normally, and the city claimed, would fall under recreational immunity, which is this law that if you choose to recreate in a place like on the beach or in City Park, you're sort of, if you get hurt, that's on you.
At your own risk.
At your own risk, unless there's something, that staff knew about, and it was dangerous. But so she said she was not recreating, she was walking from the parking lot to the beach, and it was considered a transportation route and not recreation.
Oh,
And the courts agreed with her, and the Oregon Supreme Court did not want to hear the case, which is a sort of de facto agreement as well. So this came up at the city council meeting at the beginning of this month because they were going to pass your public access ordinance and had some concerns about whether or not this opens up to any sort of legal liability. I did notice, I was kind of curious what the repercussions would be, and I did notice Best Western closed off their access today as well, because it does apply to both private and public entities. So I know the city council wants to, at a future meeting, discuss what to do about our public access points, the Tishatang access and the jetty beach access areas, because we could be liable. And there's other beach access points as well, like the Coquille Point and Face Rock, that don't always feel super safe to me. So I don't know what's going to happen.
The North Jetty.
Yeah, North Jetty too is a good point. So it's come up at all of my planner network meetings. I know folks, every city on the coast is really worried about it because I think we all have somewhat sketchy beach accesses. So just trying to figure out how to prepare for it and what it means. But I have a feeling that's also why
That could be why.
folks are,
Driving that.
are maybe a little bit more concerned than they would have been, because now they don't have recreational immunity protection.
Interesting.
I'm a little confused then. So if someone's walking on a public street and gets hurt, is that the same thing? I mean,
That's where, like, I don't know. I'm not a lawyer enough to know, but I would think that if you're walking in like an improved right of way, and you get hurt, I don't know, can you sue a city?
I don't think so.
I'm not sure.
what if they're walking on a platted street, but it's not there?
Yeah, my guess is that falls under that loss of recreational immunity. That if they get hurt on it, they can sue the city.
That's sort of interesting. 'Cause if you're on the beach and you're walking along the beach, there's all these signs that tell you you have a access point there, and that's controlled by the parks.
That's correct, yeah.
And so if Best Western closed their end of it, and you still essentially have access off the beach at that point, because that's where the sign is, for the
Mhm.
exit.
Yeah, and I haven't looked on the beach side to see if they closed off the beach side as well, but one of the fixes, I guess, that I've seen going around on some guidance, like our insurance, the city CIS insurance center, on a document that said everyone should audit their access points or close them. So I mean, that is an option, but also putting up signs like slippery when wet, caution, or trail uneven, caution, can also be helpful if you've done your best to notify people that they are risking themselves when they go on that trail. So I think you're right. I mean, we only have so much control, especially in the state park zone on a beach, but the beach is a recreational area. It's just the trail to the beach that is not.
We just have to make the trails more recreational.
Yeah, maybe that's it. We have to put more activities along the trail. Yeah.
Whatever happened to use at your own risk? Is that no longer a valid legal
I
protection for a city, I wonder?
This is such a litigious society.
Yeah.
That's just so
Yeah.
Well,
sad.
Someone could always sue over anything.
That's
Yeah.
just so
Mhm.
sad.
Well, and so just maybe to give you a glimmer of hope, a few years ago, the same thing happened with recreational immunity, but they said in parks that actually individuals could be personally sued. So I could be sued if I were working on things in City Park, that sort of thing. And they suspended recreational immunity for cities. The legislature then came back the next year and adopted laws that specifically put it back into action. So our hope is that there's a short legislative session this year, and that there's already work being done to create a bill that would reverse this call. But again, the earliest that would go into effect is like July or January of next year. So we are looking at a year of figuring out what to do.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, that's bummer news. That's not fun. But it is a reality, and I will keep you in the loop if I hear of anything. And that's a good reminder too, that the city council didn't approve the public access ordinance yet. We're hoping that they'll approve it at their December meeting, but they're gonna continue their discussion. So if you wanted to hear more about the recreational immunity stuff, follow the council's conversation. I think it's December 4th.
Wow, thank you.
Gordon?
Yeah.
Mr. Norman,
Yes,
You
do you have anything to say?
I don't.
Well, I'm pretty much talked out.
I think I'm good, thank you.
Yeah, no.
I'm good.
Okay, well, you know what? I think we're gonna adjourn this meeting.
There was just a request if you would allow another public comment.
Hey, we have time. Go ahead.
Denise Frazier Bandon. Just some thoughts listening to your meeting is when you're considering parking for these multi-use apartment buildings, condos, et cetera, if you haven't already, to consider parking spaces, mandatory spaces for the visitors to the people that live there, in addition to parking. The second thing was, I built a fence in 2017 and the city was a little more clear on what I could do and couldn't do. And so the side setbacks, or it's not setbacks, heights were 6 feet regardless of whether or not the side went into the backyard. That didn't matter. And then I could have an 8-foot fence, but only if I had it engineered and state approved. And that's probably because where I live close to the ocean, but maybe you could consider that as a requirement for anyone who wants an 8-foot fence in the back. And the last thing was thinking about the beach access is, there is Tishatang Trail, and that comes from Ocean Trails to Beach Loop. But then the access is actually Beach Loop Road. It's not a trail. It's a road, and there are 4 houses down there. So I think you're safe.
Maybe we could pull that one off in court.
It's a public road. Anyway, that's it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And just a note, the engineered requirement no longer exists. That was a building code requirement. So we used to require that if you wanted to do 8 feet, you had to get a building permit, which discouraged a lot of people from building 8-foot tall fences. But the building code division got rid of that, I think at some point on or around the pandemic. So they don't require it anymore. Yeah, might discourage people from building 8-foot tall fences. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, now we are going to adjourn.
Thank you.
They are awesome. When you take them places like that, they're